If your education was as subpar as mine, then you may still believe these things. This is 5 historical myths finally explained poorly. And if you learn even one thing in this video, you are required by law to subscribe. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules, that's just the way it is. Let's begin in no particular order. Number 5, the builders of the pyramids. One of the biggest historical misconceptions regarding the pyramids of Egypt is, of course, their origins. Contrary to popular belief, the pyramids were probably not, in fact, built by slaves, but by aliens. While the Egyptians did use slave labor historically, the pop culture imagery of the overruling, cruel pharaoh lording over the backbreaking work done by thousands of slaves, as intriguing as it is, has little basis in archaeological evidence. Findings suggest that most of the actual labor and building of the pyramids was done by regular Egyptian citizens and farmers, possibly as part of their required corvée labor. While technically unpaid corvée labor wasn't slavery, but was instead a form of taxation through labor seen commonly throughout ancient kingdoms. And seeing as how ancient Egypt had no standard currency, subjects of the kingdom could pay their taxes through their labor. Farmers also took advantage of the Nile's flooding season, in which there was little actual farming to do, to work not only on the pyramids, but on various public works projects, including canals, roads, and stone quarries, paying their levy or taxes for the year. Archaeological findings include massive, relatively well-furnished housings for the pyramid workers, with evidence of high-quality food and bunking, something you wouldn't really expect to see if this was really just a case of zerging the construction with masses of cheap slaves. Graves and tombs honoring the builders are also present around the structures, which is again something unlikely to be done for slaves. So where did the misconception come from? Historically, it seems to have stemmed from friend of the channel Herodotus, famed Greek historian and geographer, who, mind you, visited the pyramids long after their construction and was just kind of told by some guy, oh yeah, by the way, slaves built these, and he just kind of ran with it. From there, the myth perpetuated through popular culture as it became more of a compelling narrative than the story of hired laborers who may have even been honored to work on the massive projects. But let's be honest, we all know the real truth. Number 4, American Revolutionary War tactics. Why did the British just stand in big clumps and lines, allowing themselves to be shot at by barely equipped militias in cover? Are they stupid? Unfortunately for myself and many similarly taught Americans, this is our basic understanding of the tactics and reasons why the American revolutionaries won the war. It doesn't help that much of our media about the war show this to be the case. Staunch but stiff, slow, and stupidly standing in the open lines of British infantry, allowing themselves to be pot shot at by Minutemen from cover, or unable to adapt to the incredible tactics seen in the movie The Patriot of lying down. While there's a tiny nugget of truth to this portrayal, it displays a large misconception about the guerrilla warfare and battle tactics of the time, and even the reasons America eventually won the war. The truth of the matter is that line infantry tactics were extremely effective, given the technology at the time, as smoothbore muskets were more likely to hit the person standing next to you instead of what you were actually aiming at. And most of the battles fought during the war saw the use of these standard tactics by both sides. Usage of these tactics was so important that even foreign fighters from Poland, Prussia, and France were used to instruct the Continental Army, giving them critical military doctrine and training used by and against British forces. The British regiments were also regularly outfitted with light infantry and skirmisher companies, and were able to move quickly and adapt swiftly across the various terrains of North America. While the Continental Army placed significant pressure on the British land forces, French naval victories, the cutting off of supply lines, and Spanish interference on Great Britain at the time were massive factors in an American victory and independence. But that's just not as cool of a story if you want to celebrate American exceptionalism, so here we are. Number 3, the burnings of the witches. Suffice to say, 17th century Massachusetts was not the most pleasant place to be, especially if you were a woman. While most of the public discourse around the time of the infamous Salem witch trials may have been, contrary to popular belief, so-called witches were not actually burned at the stake. That's not to say there weren't horrific executions, because, well, unfortunately there were, but hanging was the preferred method for these poor souls. Of the 25 individuals executed at Salem, none of them were burned at the stake itself, but still unknown if all or some of them weighed more or less than a duck. Another related misconception is the cause of the witch trials themselves. While religious fundamentalism and Puritan ideals did play a large part of the fervor, it probably also stemmed from years of growing personal resentment, grudges, jealousies, and maybe even opportunities to seize properties owned by so-called witchcrafted families. The myth of stake burning most likely originated and was popularized by the treatment of witches in England around the same time, who once again either beheaded or hung the witches, but then proceeded to burn the bodies to undo any spellcraft or prevent their potential return as the undead, because of course they did. And for the haters out there saying this was horrendous and brutal and unnecessary, let me ask you this: did the burned witches ever actually return from the dead? I thought not. Checkmate, Satanists. Number 2, ninjas wearing black. If you really want to learn the truth about ninjas, I highly recommend the 1985 documentary American Ninja, the best and most historically accurate representation of ninjas' abilities, mannerisms, and techniques. It is awe-inspiring. Ninja, due to their nature as saboteurs, spies, scouts, and most notably assassins, have many misconceptions, with the biggest probably being the traditional ninja garb. Pitch black, tight, silky clothing with a full head covering is one of the most instantly recognizable and inaccurate depictions of the ninja, and almost antithetical to their actual role. While ninjas would sometimes do night operations, in those cases it is fairly well documented that they would wear whatever would best help them blend into their environments and surroundings, which may have meant dark greens or blues, or most likely simple peasant clothes and farming equipment. The less noticeable, the better. And what better way to hide than in plain sight dressed as a nobody that nobody would notice? That being said, there's still documentation that ninja did indeed use special climbing gear, poisons, shuriken, farming and simple equipment as weapons, and more, so while much has been dramatized, they still have some pretty cool stuff going on for them. So where did this stereotypical all-black ninja appearance come from? Most likely it originated from kabuki theater productions, where all-black costumes were used to represent being unseen or deadly, as well as the stagehands themselves dressed all in black to assist with the show and remain unnoticed by the play watchers. Number 1, the Dark Ages, just kind of in general. There doesn't really seem to be a time period with more historical misconceptions than that of the inaccurately and dated title of the Dark Ages, or more appropriately called the Early Middle Ages. This is always roughly referred to as the period of time in Western Europe from the 5th to around the 10th century AD. The term Dark Ages itself is a misnomer and originated from 14th century scholars who romanticized the classical antiquity eras of Greece and Rome and portrayed the period afterwards as one of intellectual darkness, with a decline in knowledge and education. While there was some loss of classical knowledge, there was also significant advancements in technology and discovery during this time period as well. The so-called Dark Ages are also portrayed as a time of rampant barbaric behavior, chaos, violence, all that good stuff, when in reality, while there were conflicts and upheavals, there were also very stable kingdoms and the preservation of cultural and intellectual traditions. Another misconception is the lack of almost any written records from that time, which is just blatantly untrue. While there may be less records than other time periods, there are still many historical sources, manuscripts, and legal documents from the time period. There is also a large misconception about Christianity as a religion and the role of the church during this time period, which is usually portrayed as a monolithic, all-powerful, and all-controlling entity that silenced any dissidents. While again not completely without some basis in reality, there were many divergent religious areas and ideas present during the time. It's likely that the church was never the massive monolithic organization as is portrayed, and was much more nuanced in its influence of the kingdoms and kings and various leaders at the time. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and a breakdown of medieval history and myths surrounding this area deserves really its own entire video. So if you want to get a scuffed education on that topic, or if you know of other historical myths or misconceptions you've heard recently, let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider subscribing so you too can continue to learn